And good afternoon, everybody. As Jess mentioned, my name is Dan Giacomi. I am the Director of Program Oversight and Grant Administration at DSS, fancy title for SNAP Director, but also includes Medicaid eligibility, LIHEAP, and TANF eligibility policy here. Happy to discuss a little bit about our SNAP case processing journey, where we were some 10 to 12 years ago, where we are now, and a little bit about where we hope to go in the future, and then be able to answer some of your questions or have some good discussion around that. So if we could go to the next slide, that'd be fantastic. So as I said, a little bit about where we were, and where we were was not in a good place. We were towards the bottom of the country in SNAP processing about 10 years ago, as I said, if not longer, 2011 to 2013. What began then was we were sued by a group of clients that had significant delays in receiving their SNAP benefits, so rightly so, based upon our application processing. What you'll see on the right-hand side of that screen there is our timely processed numbers for those months, for July of 2011 through April 2013, when the litigation was finally brought to the courts here. So we were, at a low of 48.9% or 49% accuracy, with a high of maybe 68% in those just about 2 years. So throughout this litigation, and then through the settlement agreement that was finally signed in 2017, the court decided that as a state, we must be timely. And what they considered timely was, based on federal regulations, 96% timely in application processing, in both regular and expedited processing separately. So what that means is we couldn't use 90% in expedited and 50% in regular and average it out. It had to be separately 96%, and we had to look at all of the cases that were processed in the month of reporting. When we tried to object to, I can still remember this very vividly, when we objected to the judge, her response to us was, if we could land a person on the moon, you could hit 96% processing timeliness in both categories here in Connecticut, so get to work. And that's what we did. As part of our settlement as well, it was the requirements were that in 22 consecutive months, or a little bit of leniency, 26 out of 30 months reported, we had to hit that 96% in both categories. Otherwise, we would start over again, or there would be further consequences. So what we also then determined was we had to do a review, as I said, of all of our SNAP applications 2 months behind whatever month we were in currently. And what that was is to account for the 60-day processing window, the first 30 days SOP, and then if there was a delay, the additional 30 days that we had to give to applicants in processing their cases. So as an example, in April, we would review all of the cases that came into our agency in February. And just a little bit of background on our agency: we serve around 400,000 individuals in the state of Connecticut. So it doesn't sound like much to some of those states that are perhaps larger, like New York or California, but in a state where we have 3.3 or 3.6 million residents, it's about 1 in 9 individuals that we're serving with SNAP benefits each month. So you look at that and you look at the numbers we're seeing each month, it's around 15 to 20,000 applications that were coming in. What we needed to determine or figure out was how many of them were actually new applications, and how many of them were individuals that were receiving benefits that, because of other processing inefficiencies, had their benefits closed and then reapplied with us. Obviously, many of us here know that term of churn better than most, and we had to look at those and see what we could do to reduce all of the different areas. Next slide, please. So the first thing that we did was try to determine what exactly was going on. And what I mean by that is looking at what mistakes or what issues were causing us to not meet those timeliness numbers that we needed to have, and broke it down to what was considered our top 5 mistakes when processing applications. In this sense, it's just an example of top 5 mistakes when processing expedited SNAP applications, for example. The first being that we were leaving cases pending for information that wasn't necessarily necessary for an expedited application, or that we had an interface or other data at our disposal that we could utilize to verify those pieces. When we look at residency, shelter, income, things of that nature, we weren't necessarily utilizing the interfaces that we had at our disposal, like the Department of Labor, the Social Security, or third-party income verifiers like the work number, or others. And in addition to that, we were doing a lot of data entry errors. So what I mean by that is, in Connecticut, we had a 2-screen system of doing expedited. And what that was is we had one dedicated page that would give a quick decision as to whether or not the case was expedited. So you would enter their information on their income, their assets, their expenses, and whether or not they met the other criteria, such as had their identity verified or had previously had expedited but hadn't supplied the verifications they needed to continue the benefits ongoing. Individuals were kind of trying to cheat that system by quickly going through and entering zeros everywhere to make it look like it was expedited when in fact the case wasn't. Or in the opposite, they were filling out the screen correctly, but then when they were filling out the rest of the application itself, or the data entry pages, were not entering information there. One, because they were trying to move quickly, or two, as I said, a data entry error, which would then improperly look at the case as being expedited when the screen itself perhaps had the correct information and it was determined that case did not meet expedited criteria. The other second party reviews and case corrections were not addressed timely. Again, what that was is for our newer staff, or those staff that are perhaps on a performance improvement plan, we would have a portion of their cases that would go to their direct supervisor for a review before benefits were going out. And the supervisor would look at things such as accuracy and case notes and all those things that go into it. But at times we're leaving those for the next day or a few days later, which were causing the case to fall out of the 7-day processing time frame. And then looking as though it was not truly processed, or it was no longer meeting the expedited criteria because the benefits didn't go out until day 8 or later. Third one, workers not authorizing cases. So they were doing the data entry and they were getting distracted, getting called out into the front office, getting a phone call, and just forgetting to go back and actually finalize the case. The fourth, failure to adhere to expedited SNAP policies and procedures. As you see on that, we did have and have had for many years an interview waiver for postponed interview for expedited SNAP cases. They were not utilizing that, and they were leaving it pending for an interview. Or, as I said, not using our interfaces such as the Department of Labor or Social Security to verify identity, and instead we're leaving it pending for identity and requesting the individual to send in information. And then the last one I kind of went over a little bit before, the household not eligible for expedited SNAP, but the worker failed to change status. So what we saw coming out of these 5 different areas, that there was a mix of worker training, there was a mix of perhaps system enhancements that could be made, and then a mix of clarification. But the overall theme was that this was not something that we could do in a vacuum. It couldn't be just my policy area that took on the corrections. It couldn't be just our systems folks that took on changing the screens, and it couldn't be, just one area. So what we had to do was come together and look at solutions. So next slide, please. That's what we did. We put our heads together because, as it says, teamwork makes the dream work. As cheesy as it sounds, it is something that we needed to do and what we started to do. So we created a multi-divisional team to review and advise on different strategies. Part of this was making sure that this was not a just one-time meeting, that this is something that we continuously meet on, that we continuously look for improvement, and we continuously become an agile workforce and an agile agency, in that when different areas arise, we're able to quickly come together, see what could be done to fix it, and start to utilize that. But then also to listen to each of the different areas to make sure that everyone had their issues, challenges, or concerns being met, that the solution was hitting all of the areas. So you'll see we not only included our eligibility operations leadership, we made sure to include eligibility operations staff. Those are the people on the front lines. They're doing the work every day. So if there were inefficiencies within our processes, or if there were challenges or concerns from our clientele or our staff, they were the ones that were going to and did bring that to the forefront to make sure that the client voice was being heard of what could be improved, what could be changed, or what could be different in order to improve upon the processing and timeliness. Obviously, we had policy staff there, same thing. We needed to know if there were additional waivers, if there were misinterpretations of policy, things of that nature that needed to be corrected, we could do that. The one that, perhaps seems a little bit like the outlier, but was, I think, the most important for us, was having our quality assurance or QC staff involved in the process as well. They were the ones that were coming back to us and saying, here's the pattern of issues that we're seeing. We're reviewing these cases each month. This is what we're seeing that's causing the cases to go and be in error and be reported and bringing down our timeliness. So each month they were able to bring those reports to us to say, here's what we're seeing. Here's what we believe we could do to change that and correct it. And making sure that, again, that we were not falling outside of the QC processes when doing that, because those of us that work perhaps in the policy and eligibility side, what we know is that there are times where there's a little bit of a variance between what eligibility says is okay and acceptable and what QC perhaps says is okay and acceptable by their processes. So before we implemented something, we wanted to make sure that we weren't going to create an efficiency on the eligibility and processing side, but create an error on the QC side that was still going to bite us in the rear end later. And then systems obviously is pretty self-explanatory. If there were defects in the system, if there were places where we could create process flows or efficiencies within the system, we wanted to make sure that they were there to tell us how long it was going to take, how much it was going to cost, and where we could make those changes. And then finally, training. I think, I like to brag to most. I think our training team here at the state of Connecticut is really one of our crown jewels. It's something that's been used as a national model, and they're the first ones to jump in and offer support, to offer assistance and offer additional trainings with our staff, and making sure that any changes, again, that were made or clarifications that were done were quickly and fully incorporated into the training that we were doing for both our new and seasoned staff. Next slide, please. So in a nod to Taylor Swift, we entered in our mitigation strategy era. And what we did was a few of the things, and some, for the brevity of the slide, I didn't mention everything, but two of the things that I think really were able to help us achieve a better place than where we were before was, one, we created a specialized office that was solely dedicated to SNAP timeliness. This office is in our New Haven regional office, or what we call resource center now. What they were really tasked with doing is the 3 T's: training, tracking, and talking. We gave them specialized boot camp style training on all things SNAP processes, as well as our SNAP waivers, to make sure that they were well versed on what needed to be done in order for a SNAP case to be processed accurately and be processed timely. 2, we wanted to make sure that they were tracking. So what gets sent to them each day is a report that identifies all of the pending SNAP applications throughout the state, regardless of what office the individual visited or what avenue they submitted the application, whether it be online or paper or dropping off in a Dropbox or anything, that they were able to track it from the very day that it hit our system until the day that it was processed and whether it was approved or denied. And we split that report into 4 categories. The first being expedited SNAP that is within its 7 days, so it's still timely. Expedited SNAP nearing day 5. And the reason we did day 5 was just to make sure that when we hit day 5, that we at minimum had an EBT card issued to the household, so that if the case was granted on day 6 or day 7, they had immediate access to those benefits, which would then allow them to be considered timely for the expedited processing. We then had a day 15 tracker for regular applications, which were pending but had gotten to the midway point of the 30-day SOP. And then a day 30 tracker, which allowed us to look at those cases that were now at the 30th day that needed to have a decision be made or needed to have some sort of delay code as to why that case was not able to be processed within the first 30 days. So each day when that office goes into work, their managers or their supervisors are able to pull those lists, quickly distribute them to the workers that they have there, and then get to work on tracking them. And then going into the third point of talking, to be able to talk to both the individuals who perhaps processed the initial application and left it pending, perhaps improperly, as well as with each other to look at problem cases, things of that nature, making sure everyone was on the same page. If there were issues that were seen, that they could bring it back to the mitigation team's knowledge and forefront to say, here's a new trend we're seeing or new issue we're seeing. And then on the QC side and the supervisory review side, what we did was keep it simple, silly. And what that means is we, again, created a new report that made the ability to see some common errors extremely recognizable. And that's the report you see at the bottom of the screen there. And what that does, again, is it shows us the cases. There's 2 tabs of the report. One is for applications and the other is for renewals. And it comes out each Monday and it shows us a list of all of the cases that were processed in the week prior. So all of the new applications that were done the previous week, as well as all the renewals, with a list of, I'm sorry, that is not the report. That report that you see there is the first report I was talking about, where it tracks the cases. This report that I'm talking about with the errors actually has information about income, shelter, household size, all of the things that perhaps go into the determination of a SNAP case, that allowed us to look at those cases and to determine if there were anomalies. For example, you see someone that has 0 income, 0 assets, reporting shelter of $3,000 a month. While it's not necessarily a determination of fraud, it allows us to look at that case to ensure that case notes are properly determining, or at least educating as to how that shelter is being paid, or if there was an explanation as to why the shelter is not being paid. They just lost their job. They still had the responsibility, things of that nature, as well as looking at perhaps some simple data entry errors. One of the most common errors we found when we started doing that secondary report was that there was a lot of mistyping of zeros when we were doing income and shelter costs. So we were seeing a lot of monthly rents of, we'll say, same example, instead of $3,000 a month, $30,000 a month. Having that one report and being able to filter that Excel file from largest to smallest was able to allow us to pull those out immediately, send an email and say, hey, I see this case came up on the report. I think there was a typographical error here because it says the person's paying $30,000 a month in shelter. You might want to have that looked at. So that report that I'm talking about goes out to our local QC staff that we have. We have 8 local SNAP QC reviewers, as well as all of our eligibility supervisors. And part of our mitigation strategy, we asked that all of our eligibility supervisors review at least 20 cases per month at random from their staff. Again, we were finding that there were some supervisors that were great at it. We loved doing it. We're pulling SNAP cases. We're finding errors. We found some other supervisors that perhaps were waiting to the last day of the month, pulling out as many 0 income, 0 shelter cases as they could find and only reviewing those, or pulling out periodic report forms, or some people call them interim reports, and reviewing those. So through this report, we were able to get that out to them and say, here's a listing, here's the criteria by which you should be looking for cases to review. And we found ourselves to be in a position of being able to do that. And then the second thing that we did to keep it simple is we really went about going through and simplifying our SNAP policy. We had previously a uniform policy manual, or we called UPM, that was very written very legalese, that was very hard to search, understand, and interpret. And what we did was, through grant funding, we're able to create a SNAP policy manual that was able to simplify everything, have search terms, have an index, which I think staff found to be amazing because they could actually get to things quickly, and be able to have examples and desk aids and desk guides that go with it, so that when there were questions, they were able to quickly and efficiently get the answer that they needed in a way that allowed them to continue working and not spend half a day trying to look up that policy. And then the final thing that we decided to do, next slide, please, is, as I said, taking a village, reinforce that policy, but trying to make it as fun as possible. Instead of just sending out what we call POGA, or program oversight in grant administration, or program information bulletins, or whatever you call them, paper documents that said, here's the change of policy, here's the clarification, read it, understand it. We realized that there needed to be reinforcement of that policy, and it needed to come in a multitude of different arenas. One is, we make sure that any policy information change or update that we send out, we immediately follow it up with a town hall meeting. We call together all of the supervisors and some of what we consider or call eligibility specialists to come to a Teams meeting that we have, where we then go over the policy. We provide examples, we offer Q&As, we make sure that they're comfortable enough to be able to understand the policy, because they then take it back to their unit meetings and are the ones that are providing it to their staff. So it's like a train the trainer type of event, where each one is then reinforced through that. Secondarily, we do what's called Kahoot. Many people have seen them at some of the conferences, policy conferences or otherwise, but it's an online quiz platform. You're able to either do it in a live setting, where you could do it with the individuals that you're having the Teams meeting or otherwise with, or you can set it to be done at a interval, so be done by next Friday, for example. And the reason that we wanted to do that, and we like doing that, is because it has a very rich reporting backend that allows us to look at the questions that were asked, as well as the responses that were provided by staff, to see if there's an area of interpretation or area of policy that is perhaps more confusing than other areas, or that needs more reinforcement through these other arenas. So it allows us to look at it and say, wow, we offered this to 800 staff members, 300 reported back or completed it. Of that 300, 60% got this question wrong. Perhaps we need to create additional trainings or information sessions or otherwise on this area. Or 90% of it got this one right. And we're good with it. We can move on and make sure we've updated that. So we're able to provide that to our eligibility leadership, as well as that training staff, as I mentioned earlier, to show them where we need some reinforcement. And then another one, as you'll see on the screen, it looks a little silly, but I was able to create a PowerPoint Jeopardy game show, and it's actually interactive. So if I'm not going to do it today for time's sake, but if we did have it up, you could click on each of the categories. It would bring you to a slide with the answer, and then you could play that interactively with staff. And we provided that out again to all of our eligibility supervisors, and they could update it to be any questions they want, any topics they want. As you can see on the screen there, some of the topics that we had were in regards to the standard utility allowance, to income, simplified reporting, which is the keep it simple silly, PER fection or payment error rate, time to make the donuts, which was timeliness, and then just a hodgepodge of different areas you could add. We had some fun questions about some of our supervisors or managers or things of that nature. but that allows us to really interact with the staff, have a little bit of fun with it within our meetings and reinforce the policy that we have. Now that's all the formal slides that I have. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have on our journey here. I will say that through all of our processes and our ability to do this, we are in a position now where our last few timeliness reports or APT reports that have come out from FNS have put us in the top percentile of timeliness here in the country, processing between 96 and 98% timely. And we were, I believe it was June of 2022 or 2023, able to finally meet the requirements of our settlement agreement and get out from underneath that lawsuit. So even throughout the pandemic, we were able to keep ourselves in a position of processing our cases timely. And as I said, meet those conditions and not at the sacrifice of payment accuracy. Here in the state, I know we're not necessarily talking about that, but we were a state that was also in litigation, that was in deficiency status for 2 years in 2019. We did have to submit a reinvestment plan in 2019, and we have since been able to reduce our payment error rates by a good 2% down to about 7.5% to 8% throughout that. So we were able to make those strategies. And a lot of that, as I said, I attribute to the multi-divisional work group, as well as being agile and making sure that we were coming back together to look at all of the different strategies, what was working, what was not working, and to pivot as appropriate. So thank you for having me. Like I said, happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.